Moving now into Iraq, you described the UK strategy that was evolving. That was your phrase, and possibly not fully clear until 2005. What about a coalition strategy? Was there one, and what form did it take?
Well, again, I think the overall coalition strategy evolved in accordance with the situation that developed on the ground inside Iraq, and one of the things that needed to be taken into account was the fact that, in effect, the Iraqi army and Iraqi police service had either been disbanded or had disbanded itself, and, therefore, there was a need to generate manpower to carry out security and law and order tasks pretty rapidly, and so the early strategy from the coalition was very much to generate manpower which could be used for law and order and security duties. Over time, and perhaps not very much time, I think there was a recognition that that by itself was not enough, that it was necessary also to build up the institutions that would have to lie behind these forces. So the work, for example, to start building up the Iraqi Ministry of Defense actually started in 2003, although it probably didn't really get into its stride until a little later into 2004. So I think there was a realization early on that that needed to be dealt with as well. The other thing that had to be taken into account was the security situation itself, because, of course, the Iraqi security forces would ultimately have to deal with the security situation, as it were, and that in itself involved, in 2006, for example, we saw a big rise in sectarian violence, which posed particular challenges, not just for the coalition, but also for the growing Iraqi security forces. So again, I think it was a question of evolution. I suppose the final point I would make in terms of overall coalition strategy was that generating Iraqi security force capability was, of course, on the critical path towards handing over responsibility to the Iraqis province by province, the process that became known as PIC, Provincial Iraqi Control. That became part of the objectives and, therefore, part of the strategy.
In general, would you say that the British approach fitted in with the rest of the coalition approach, essentially the American approach?
Well, I think that the British approach was, in effect, represented by the fact that we had significant representation in the coalition structures. We obviously had the Deputy Commander of MNFI. We also had the Deputy Commander of the Multinational Security Transition Command Iraq, the appallingly entitled MNSTCI, and we had that influence. In terms of our approach, I'm not sure I would necessarily recognize a very, very distinctive approach to security sector reform which was radically different from a very, very distinctive US one. I think all of us learned, as time went on, and, of course, US and UK weren't the only people playing this role.
Was there a distinctive British role within that, as opposed to a distinctive British strategy?
Well, as I already mentioned the work that we did with the 10th Division in MND Southeast, and I think we also did some mentoring for the 14th Division, and we had a role, as I say, in the Ministry of Defence, which was, I think, that was distinctive in the sense that the British Ministry of Defence sort of led that.
A bit slower, please.
Apologies. Yes.
You have described this. These are largely military areas. Would you see this as largely a military role that we were playing?
I think in terms of the resources that were devoted to security sector reform, certainly in the period 2004 to 2006, I think the military sort of was overwhelmingly the major supplier of resources, but we did actually appoint a succession of police advisors, both in Baghdad and Basra, and the Foreign Office also provided a number of police trainers, particularly in MND Southeast, both civilian policemen and also contractors from firms like Armour Group,